I'm Morna McDermott. I'm an associate professor at Towson University in Towson, Maryland. Prior to being in teacher education, which I've done for the last 12 years, I was a classroom teacher, K-12 and special education. I think the reason the opt-out movement, testing resistance movement, came and found me is because, well, when I was teaching, it was before No Child Left Behind. I am one of those old school teachers who had more autonomy over my curriculum, over my assessments, over the decision making that I had in and around my classroom, with my students, my student relationships. And then I got into higher education and was learning more and more about the ill effects of high stakes testing via No Child Left Behind. I've always been adamantly opposed to high stakes standardized testing. But in the era of No Child Left Behind, I still felt like I was able to look at my college students who are beginning teachers and say, you know what, when push comes to shove, forget the test, shut your door, do best practices, and we could get away with that narrative for a little while. And the stakes have risen up. We've now replaced No Child Left Behind with Race to the Top, which is No Child Left Behind on steroids. We've replaced the Jack Russell with a pit bull. The accountability, the fear, the top-down micromanaging, the surveillance, all of that has pushed us so far into a corner that merely complaining about it or trying to close our door and mind our own business no longer works, because they've come and found us. The other reason I think the opt-out movement came and found me is because I now have 2 children who are in public schools. Even if I left this battle as an educator, I will never be able to leave it as a parent, because my children are immediately affected, their friends are immediately affected, and whole generations of children whom are going to be the peers, the citizens, that share the world in 20, 30, 40 years with my children are going to be affected. And I care greatly about the kind of world that we're going to leave for all of our children. What happens to other children matters to me because it's going to affect the future that my children inhabit. Therefore, whether or not this were affecting my kids directly, which it doesn't as much as it would, say, in a lot of urban centers or a lot of disenfranchised communities. I have a good public school. We still have art and music and recess and PE. We're not feeling it as greatly as other communities. I could easily just say, well, it doesn't bother me. I don't need to be in this. But I don't see it that way. I see that what happens to other children is going to affect all of us in future generations, and we have to care about what happens in other communities to other people's children as much as we have to care about our own. I engage the other parents that are in my school. We're sitting, we're at the bus stop, we're at a kids' party at a park, and they're surprised when I talk about this because they don't see it imminently happening yet. And I say yet because the ripple effect, in the pond has moved out. We started with those locations that we could colonize most easily. These poor black and brown urban communities where we want to gentrify the neighborhoods, where we want to resegregate the schools, where parents don't have as much financial autonomy or political clout to push back, where they have been left so desperately starving for resources and good, really quality education to begin with, that they're more willing to grab at these fake solutions like charter schools. Not because they're uninformed or unintelligent, but they've been left with no other recourse. You hand a starving person anything and they're going to go for it, because we've never adequately addressed fully the inadequacies that we have in public education. We've never honored the promise to democratically grounded public education, free to all of its citizenry in the way that we pay lip service to. We've had segregation, we've had unequal funding, we've never given public education a chance in all these communities. And for a while it stayed there, but now with Park and with the new assessments, Parker SBAC, with Common Core, and with the corporate interest spreading its tentacles farther and farther out, now that they've set camp, they've pitched camp at ground zero, and now they're moving out and they're beginning to colonize all of these other public school communities. Now I am feeling it. I still have good teachers, I still have art, music, and PE. We don't have a test-driven curriculum as much as a lot of other schools because our kids tend to perform pretty well where we live. But now everything's going to be on an iPad. Now my son has 2 hours of tech lab, but only 45 minutes of art, music, or PE, because he has to know how to keyboard. Because he has to know how to keyboard so that he can take the test. Now we've got lighthouse schools in Maryland where these third-party private corporations are going to be delivering education to children that used to be delivered in the school by teachers. My kid's going to now set it an iPad and have this one-to-one delivery directly from a company, right, that's going to data mine all the information that they gather from my child under the guise of, what's the word they use, more personalized education, right? In other words, there's no interference from even me as a parent. And I got to tell you, as a parent, I have a problem with my child being data mined under the name of education. And those are the ways that privatization has spread itself out. I doubt very much that my school will ever become a charter school, but that doesn't mean that the privatizing tentacles won't come and find us anyway. Because there are numerous ways that they're going to go. They're either going to close public schools and open them as charters, using that test-driven data to do so, or they're going to keep schools under the guise of your community schools in these nice white suburban neighborhoods. Everything's fine, carry on as usual, but we're going to make sure that we deliver more and more of your content online from these private companies or think tanks or organizations that are going to be delivering the curriculum, the proscribed curriculum, and my children are going to sit at a computer and they're going to key in answers. And while they do that, those companies are also going to be collecting consumer data-driven information about my child to not only discover what kind of learner they are, but what kind of products they might be able to sell to my child. And then use that data to then begin to sort and track all of our children in ways that I don't even think we can begin to imagine. I don't think we can imagine where this is going to go. And I don't want to wait and find out, because I do think there's a jumping off point at which it's going to be too late, and we're going to be left scratching our heads saying, how did we get here? And I'm going to be the person who's going to want to look back and say, I told you so. We knew that this was coming. We saw that this was coming, and we can't ignore it anymore. We can't ignore it, because once we go off that cliff, I'm very afraid we're never going to be able to pull ourselves back out of it. I think what we lack collectively as a society is a true appreciation of our social and political history. When you look back at any of the events that have happened that we look back at and go, oh, that was horrific. How did people ever let that happen? How did we ever let slavery happen? How did we ever let, all these events, these genocidal events in our collective history ever happen? And we never ask ourselves, am I in the middle of one right now? Because if you want to know how it happened, you better look in the mirror, because I think one of those events is happening right now. I think this is, as somebody said earlier today, an education genocide. We're completely eradicating our rights to our privacy, our rights to our children, our rights to a democratically driven, locally owned public education system. We're turning it all over to corporations. Well, what are you doing now? Because right now we have these things happening, and so we need to wake up, we need to have an appreciation of history and allow it to inform our present understanding of what it means to have agency in our country, what it means to have agency as a citizen, what it means to look at the ways in which our rights are being quietly and slowly being eroded by corporate interests. We've never been at a historical moment where multi-billion-dollar companies are more powerful than the most powerful national government, and that what's driving the tentacles of this top-down oppressive reform via the federal government are these corporations that, irregardless of their personal or political ideology, are being driven by greed, are being driven by control, and are being driven by a global perspective on education as a tool to wield their own corporate interests. The first thing we have to do is clearly understand the origins of the problem. Who created this? Who's benefiting from it? Where the interests are coming from, before we know how we're going to go out and dismantle it. We have to be very clear about the problem before we can be clear about the solutions.